Hello, everybody. Okay, so one of my students asked if I could go through and discuss the flow of a proof. Um, so that is what we are going to attempt to do today. Now, first thing is let's talk about what we have. We have, and we can mark this in our diagram, BDE, so that angle, and CDE, that angle, congruent to each other. And I know that BD, so that segment, and CD, that segment, are congruent to each other. That's what I have. Now, what I want is and I'll mark this with 2, ABD. I want those two segments there, or those two angles there, congruent to each other. That's what I want. That's what I want to prove ultimately. Now, there's a lot of ways to prove that angles are congruent. But if we look at the diagram we have, the angles that I want to show are congruent are part of two separate triangles. So if I can show that triangle ADB is congruent to triangle ADC, then this would follow from that, because they would be corresponding parts of congruent triangles. So if I can show that these two triangles are congruent, then I will have my congruent angles. So I have really 4 options available to me to show that triangles are congruent. Side, 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 angle, side, angle, side, angle, and angle, angle, side. So these 4 relationships, any of them, would be sufficient to show that these two triangles are congruent. So now I'm going to look at the information that I have just in the diagram. And the big thing is I have that AD is congruent to AD. Okay. So I'll add that, add a section for the diagram. I have that AD is congruent to AD. And that is the reflexive property. So, reflexive property. Okay. So, if I look at what I had 2 sides that happen to be part of my triangle congruent. And then from the reflexive property, I can see that AD is congruent to itself. So these 2 triangles, ADB and ADC share already two sides. So this makes me think that I would want to try to use one of these two up here. So side, 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 or side, angle, side. And this is where I have to make a decision. And the way I'm going to make this decision is based off of my given information. So I'm going to come up here. I have BDE is congruent to CDE. Now, at first glance, neither of those angles are inside the two triangles that I care about. But those two angles do form a linear pair with this angle and this angle. And those two angles are in my triangles that I want to show are congruent. So we are going to use side angle side. And we're going to need specifically BD congruent to CD, which we have in our given information. We are going to need AD congruent to AD, which we have from the reflexive property. And we also need that angle BDA is congruent to angle CDA, which we do not have yet. So now we are at a point that we can kind of start writing this proof. And just so that we can kind of see how everything flows together, we are going to write a flow proof. So the first thing that I like to do in flow proofs is list my given information in two spots. So I have angle BDE is congruent to angle CDE. And I have that BD is congruent to CD. These are both just given, and we'll just make a quick note. Given, given. Okay. I'm also going to put, because it's something that we have from our diagram, it is given from our diagram that we have AD congruent to AD. And the reason here being the reflexive property. Okay. So let's now start piecing things together. We know from the work that we did over here that if we can show that angle BDA is congruent to angle CDA, then we can use this, and that statement to show that these two triangles are congruent. And if we can show those two triangles are congruent, we can show these angles are congruent. So let's do this. I know that I am going to try to show that angle BDA is congruent to angle CDA. I know I'm going to try to show that. Okay. Well, from my diagram, I can see that ADB angle ADB and angle EDB are supplementary. I also can see from my diagram that angle ADC and angle CDE are supplementary. Notice this is not from our given information. This is from the diagram. And these two share the same reason. That reason being that linear pairs are supplementary. Linear pairs are supplementary. Okay. So now let's connect a couple of things here, because we have a lot of stuff written down, and all of it is either from the diagram or from something that we want in order to show that these triangles are congruent. So we are going to connect the dots here, and this fact, the fact that ADC and CDE are supplementary, this fact, the fact that angle ADB and angle EDB are supplementary, and this fact, that angle BDE is congruent to angle CDE. Those three things tell me that these two angles, angle BDA and angle CDA, are congruent. And the reason is that if two angles are supplementary, which I'm going to abbreviate SUP, to two congruent angles, then they are congruent. So, my given information and my diagram yielded these two angles are congruent. Okay. This now is going to take us to, and I'll actually go with my red. This is going to take us to triangle ADB is congruent to triangle ADC. And the things that make this true are the fact that we have this angle here, this side here, and this statement here. And this produces side, angle, side. So my reason is side, angle, side, triangle, congruence. Okay. Now we can make our final statement, what we ultimately want to prove. And that is that angle ABD is congruent to angle ACD. That comes straight from my congruent triangles. And the reason is that corresponding parts of congruent triangles are congruent. Okay. This whole diagram, this flow proof, the whole purpose of it is for you to see how the things flow together. Notice that every statement that has an arrow pointing to it is built off of either my given statements or statements that are seen in the diagram. So in conclusion, you would have kind of a thought process that you need to go through in order to show triangles or parts of triangles are congruent. First thing is to figure out what you have. If the diagram is not already marked for you, this is when you need to mark the diagram. Then, figure out which way you're going to try to approach what it is you want. You want these two triangles to be congruent because the thing that we want to prove are parts of those two triangles. After we figure out what it is we want or how we're going to prove our triangles are congruent, which is based off of our given information and what we're missing. Then we can go through and fill in the pieces from the diagrams. My supplementary angles are from the diagram. My reflexive property is from the diagram. Use my given information and the information present in the diagram to prove what I need in order to get what I want, which ultimately lets me finish the proof. You can write this in other ways, but this video is long enough. So I thank you for watching, and I hope that this helps.